Hi, welcome back to Cybersecurity for Everyone. I'm Dr. Charles Harry. In our last episode, we talked about how to scale the internet and how the government tried to use incentive structures to get the private sector more involved in building out the technology. In this episode, I want to talk about the next internet-based boom, building the World Wide Web. And this is oftentimes the way that most of us interact with the internet. So, by the late 1980s, the internet really had become standardized. We had standardized the specific set of instructions that were required for internetworking, right? This concept that was initially pioneered in the late 50s and 60s. And this is a reflection of the collective work between academia, the government, and the private sector. And so by 1992, the internet really is a global standard linking millions of devices around the world. But it's not quite the way that we think of the internet today. It was a set of networks connected, but the way in which individuals leveraged those networks was really quite different than what we find today. So the question is, how do ordinary people use the internet? It's one thing if you're a researcher and you want to share information with a colleague on the other side of the country or on the other side of the world. You can use a particular protocol to transfer a file, and that's helpful, it's useful. But that's really not quite the same way that we think about the internet today. We're not sharing cat videos. We're not booking hotel reservations. Right? That's not what we're talking about by the end of the 1980s. And so the internet, you can think of it as a closed system of private networks. And there are some firms that exist that try to develop some sort of user interface, a way for people to actually leverage this utility. And so a gentleman by the name of Tim Berners-Lee, who's working out at CERN in Switzerland, comes up with this concept of the World Wide Web in the late 1980s. And really it's a sense of web pages, of content that are linked together and the ability for people to modify that content, which is at the heart of this idea. So Berners-Lee, out at CERN, develops the World Wide Web, and it quickly becomes adopted by early users because of the ease in which they can develop content and link it together. So on top of all these networks that are interconnected, you now have a set of instructions that allow users to develop their own content and to create linkages with other content on other networks. So there's an information layer that's put on top of all these network devices. And so one of the very first popular applications that's developed to navigate the World Wide Web is something called Mosaic, and it becomes quickly the most popular web browser very early on. And by 1993, the World Wide Web becomes the dominant way to utilize the internet. Tim Berners-Lee helps develop and further move this particular set of technology forward by helping to form the Worldwide Consortium in 1994, which is basically a way for them to manage content. We'll talk more about governance of the World Wide Web in another episode. And at this particular point in time, Silicon Valley investment really starts driving additional web technology development. And so what we start to see is that there's a move from most of this work being developed in Western Europe and on the East Coast of the United States and starts to get moved over to the West Coast. So in the early 1990s, Mosaic is the early leader in browser technology. And starting in 1993, 1994, the core development team of Mosaic picks up and goes out and forms its own corporation called Netscape. Some of you may have heard this company. It does not exist anymore. At the same time, the Microsoft Corporation comes up with a competitor browser platform called Internet Explorer. Many of you have probably heard of this particular browser. And so what you see in the 1990s is intense competition between Netscape and Microsoft. And they quickly dominate the entire market of browser technology. So the World Wide Web continues to develop throughout the 1990s. And what started off in essence in a laboratory environment in 1990 out at CERN, by the end of the decade has over 350 million people utilizing the World Wide Web. Imagine that. Something that is just dreamed up in 1990, 10 years later, starts to dominate globally. It's the user-friendly ability of the World Wide Web to develop content and to link it together that makes it the first killer app. So the takeaways from this particular episode are, first and foremost, the standardization, privatization, and scaling of the internet that we saw and we talked about in the prior episode really sets us up for a new set of technologies, the World Wide Web. And it sparks a new round of competition between a couple of corporations, specifically Netscape and Microsoft. And by the end of the decade, we now see the World Wide Web as the dominant way in which users leverage the internet. In our next episode, we're going to talk about how the World Wide Web has continued to develop. See you next time.